Welcome, where every episode is an induction into the Hip Hop Hall of Fame. The first ladies of the mic, the Salt and Pepper story. 1. The Sears Roebuck Pivot. In the mid-1980s, the rap game was a noisy, masculine landscape defined by bravado and borough wars. But inside a Sears department store in Queens, two friends, Cheryl Salt James and Sandra Peppa Denton, were busy drafting a social coup. They weren't looking to be background singers or decorative additions to a male group. They were looking to seize the microphone and speak for a demographic the industry had completely ignored. Under the guidance of Herbie Lovebug Azor, they released The Showstopper in 1985. It was a direct response to the dominant sounds of the day, and it signaled a massive cultural shift. They weren't just female rappers. They were the first to prove that women could hold the rhythmic authority of a room without sacrificing their femininity. They traded the aggressive snarl of the streets for a conversational flow that felt like a secret between best friends. They were the first to bring a fashion-forward aesthetic to the culture. The iconic 8-ball jackets and asymmetrical hair, proving that the look was just as powerful as the lyric. They weren't just a group. They were the first relatable voices in a genre that was about to become the soundtrack of the youth. 2. The Platinum Revolution. In 1986, Salt and Pepper released Hot, Cool, and Vicious, and the commercial ceiling for women in hip-hop was shattered forever. The album was a masterpiece of accessibility, and when a B-side track called Push It caught fire in the clubs, the world was forced to acknowledge a new, mainstream muscle. This wasn't just a catchy record, it was a global anthem. It became the first rap record by a female act to achieve platinum status, proving that hip-hop had the commercial reach to dominate the pop charts on its own terms. They weren't softening the sound for the radio, they were making it infectious. They proved that the duo dynamic, backed by the masterful precision of Spinderella on the turntables, was a devastatingly effective way to command a stage. They set the diamond standard for what success looked like, proving that women weren't just participants in the culture, they were market leaders. They turned the music video into a visual statement, bridging the gap between the fashion runway and the block party. 3. The evolution of the conversation. Many artists would have stayed in the party rap lane, but Salt and Pepper were the first to prove that a hip-hop artist could evolve into a vehicle for social change. In the early 90s, they moved beyond the dance floor and started addressing the realities of life. With tracks like Let's Talk About Sex, they used their global platform to tackle health awareness and female empowerment at a time when those topics were considered taboo. They were the first to prove that you could lead the dialogue. They transitioned from the teenage sensations of the 80s into the powerhouse women of the 90s, blending high-energy hip-hop with soulful, mature themes. They used their voices to advocate for self-respect and agency, proving that the MC could be a tool for education and liberation. They showed the world that hip-hop wasn't a man's world. It was a human experience. They paved the way for every independent woman who followed, from Queen Latifah to Megan Thee Stallion, proving that you didn't have to change your story to be a legend. 4. the spirit of the trailblazers. As we look at the modern landscape, we see Salt and Peppa's vibrancy in every female artist who steps into the booth. We see it in the confidence of the delivery. We see it in the business savvy that allows artists to build brands. And we see it in the fearlessness of artists who refuse to be silent. They brought a level of stylistic courage to the game that pushed every other artist to think bigger. They were the first to prove that pop rap could have substance and that a party could also be a statement. They redefined the science of the image by treating their visual identity as an extension of their music. They didn't just give us hits, they gave us a blueprint for longevity. They proved that hip hop was a universal language that could celebrate womanhood and still remain authentically street. 5. The induction of the queens. We induct Salt and Peppa not just for the millions of records they sold, but for the doors they kicked down. They were the first to prove that a female voice could carry a genre to the top of the Billboard charts and keep it there. For the beats that made the world dance, for the conversations that changed how we think, and for being the first to show us that a song could be a movement. We officially induct the first ladies of rap, the queens from Queens, Salt and Peppa, into the Hip Hop Hall of Fame. Chapter 1. The DAISY Age and the Death of the Uniform. In 1989, the visual language of hip-hop was dominated by leather jackets, heavy gold chains, and a hardcore aesthetic. But three kids from Amityville, Long Island, Kelvin Posnuos Mercer, David Trugoy the Dove Jolicoeur, and Vincent Passamaster Mays Mason, stepped into the spotlight wearing peace signs, floral prints, and a sense of whimsy that the culture had never seen. They called it the Daisy Age. Da inner sound, y'all. They weren't soft. They were sophisticated. They brought a bohemian and surrealist energy to the golden era, proving that you didn't have to be a tough guy to be a genius. With the production guidance of Prince Paul, they moved away from the standard drum machine loops and introduced a psych pop and jazz-fused soundscape. They were the first to show that hip-hop could be vulnerable, funny, and abstract all at once. They broke the uniform of the genre, opening the doors for every eclectic artist who followed, from Outkast and Pharrell to Tyler, the Creator. They proved that originality was the most radical act of rebellion. Chapter 2. 3 Feet High and Rising. The sampling masterpiece. The true legend of De La Soul is their creative fearlessness. In 1989, they released 3 Feet High and Rising, an album that many critics consider the Sgt. Pepper's of hip-hop. It wasn't just a collection of songs, it was a sonic collage. They were the first to treat the sample like a paintbrush, pulling from Steely Dan, Hall & Oates, Otis Redding, and even French language instructional records. They turned the recording studio into a laboratory of the imagination. They pioneered the skit, creating a narrative world between the tracks that made the listener feel like they were part of a secret club. They proved that a rap album could have the theatrical depth and internal logic of a concept record. But their innovation came with a price. They were the first group to face a massive legal battle over sampling clearance, a fight that changed the business of music forever. They became the martyrs of the sample, sacrificing their own commercial momentum to protect the creative freedom of the entire culture. They showed the world that art was a battlefield, and they were the frontline soldiers for authentic expression. Chapter 3: The De La Soul is Dead era and the Evolution of Integrity. Many groups would have stayed in the peace and love lane forever, but De La Soul was the first to prove that a hip-hop artist could deconstruct their own image. In 1991, they released De La Soul is Dead, an album that explicitly killed off the Daisy Age persona. They were frustrated by being labeled hippie rappers and chose to evolve into a grittier and more cynical sound that reflected the true complexity of their lives. This was a landmark moment for the Hall of Fame. It was the first time a superstar group intentionally reinvented themselves to preserve their artistic integrity. They moved toward the jazz rap and boom bap sounds that would define the mid-90s, proving that they were musicians first and personalities second. They became the anchors of the Native Tongues Collective, providing the intellectual and spiritual backbone for a tribe called Quest and Jungle Brothers. They showed every artist who followed that you don't have to stay in your lane, you can build your own road. They taught the culture that longevity was about honesty, not trends. Chapter 4: The Induction of the Plugs. We induct De La Soul not just for the million-selling records or the revolutionary samples, but for the freedom they gave the culture. They were the ones who reminded us that self-expression has no limits, and that the inner sound is the most powerful voice of all. They turned the beat into a boutique, and the boutique into a legacy. For the flowers that grew through the concrete, for the samples that redefined the science of sound, and for being the first to show us that a plug could power the entire world, we officially induct the pioneers of the abstract, the great De La Soul, into the Hip Hop Hall of Fame. Chapter 1: The Voice of the 718. In 1988, the rap game was a heavyweight division dominated by men, but in the heart of Brooklyn, a teenager named Lana Moore was developing a vocal tone that would change the frequency of the culture. When she dropped I Am Woman, she wasn't just introducing herself, she was issuing a manifesto. MC Lyte didn't rely on the high-pitched delivery of the past. She brought a deep, resonant, and authoritative voice to the microphone that commanded immediate respect. She was the first to prove that a female MC could be hard without being a caricature. She didn't need a girlfriend persona or a male counterpart to validate her presence. When she stepped into the booth for her debut album, Light as a Rock, she brought a lyrical density that rivaled the greatest poets of the era. She was the first woman to show that you could be sophisticated and street smart in the same breath. She brought a Brooklyn grit to the Hall of Fame that was built on wordplay and timing. She taught the world that the microphone didn't have a gender, it only had a master. Chapter 2: The Paper-Thin Precision. The true legend of MC Lyte is the technical excellence of her pen. In an era where many rappers were still using basic rhyme schemes, Lyte was a master of the sarcastic narrative. When she released Paper Thin, she created a classic anthem of independence and discernment. She used her lyrics to dissect the phoniness of the industry and the street, proving that her eyes were as sharp as her ears. She was a pioneer of the storytelling art form, using tracks like 10% Diss to show that she could dismantle an opponent with a cool, surgical precision. She didn't need to yell to be heard. Her cadence was so perfect that every word landed like a heavyweight punch. She proved that a female artist could lead a national conversation about respect, integrity, and the art of the rhyme. She influenced every lyrical powerhouse who followed, from Queen Latifah and Lauryn Hill to Rhapsody. She showed the culture that substance was the ultimate weapon. Chapter 3: The First Lady of the Full Length. The historical significance of MC Lyte is her foundational victory. By becoming the first solo female rapper to release a complete album, she proved to the major labels that women were viable and profitable anchors for the industry. She moved the female MC from the novelty single category into the album artist category. She paved the way for the golden era to become a diverse and inclusive empire. Her longevity is a testament to her evolution. She successfully transitioned from the hardcore sounds of the 80s to the smooth R&B crossovers of the 90s with hits like Poor Georgie and Keep On Keepin' On. She was the first to show that a rapper could be a businesswoman, a voiceover artist, and a philanthropist, using her platform to uplift the next generation of women in the arts. She became the architect of the female solo career, proving that you didn't have to burn out, you could build. She stood as the North Star for every woman who wanted to be judged by the quality of her mind rather than the look of her image. Chapter 4: The Induction of the Brooklyn Sovereign. We induct MC Lyte not just for the barriers she broke, but for the dignity she brought to the game. She was the one who reminded us that skill is the only true currency, and that Brooklyn is the home of the lyrical elite. She turned the mic into a scepter and the booth into a throne. For the voice that shook the foundations, for the album that started a movement, and for being the first to show us that a queen could rule the streets of Brooklyn with an iron pen, we officially induct the legend, the sovereign, the great MC Lyte, into the Hip Hop Hall of Fame. Chapter 1: The St. Albans Architects and the Low-End Revolution. In the late 1980s, while the industry was looking for the next hardcore street anthem, four childhood friends from Queens were already deconstructing the anatomy of the groove. Q-Tip, Phife Dawg, Ali Shaheed Muhammad, and Jarobi White didn't just walk into the booth. They were designing a new vibration. Q-Tip brought the abstract poetics and the meticulous crate digging, while Phife Dawg brought the 5-foot assassin grit and the sports fanatic wit. They brought a bohemian sophistication and a jazz sampling transparency to the Hall of Fame that turned St. Albans into a global headquarters for the thinking man's hip-hop. They moved the culture away from the overt aggression and introduced the cool intelligence. When they released People's Instinctive Travels and the Paths of Rhythm in 1990, they weren't just dropping an album, they were establishing a new philosophy. They proved that a group could write, produce, and market a gold-certified global anthem like Bonita Applebum or Can I Kick It, while remaining entirely unique. They showed the world that the East wasn't just a concrete jungle, it was a lyrical garden. They turned the recording studio into a sonic lab, proving that vibe and internal rhythm were the ultimate tools for capturing the soul. Chapter 2: The Midnight Marauders Blueprint and the Native Tongue Fusion. The true legend of A Tribe Called Quest is the rhythmic marriage of the early 1990s. They were the pioneers of the jazz rap transition, proving that hard-hitting boom bap and rare groove melodies were the same heartbeat. With the release of The Low End Theory, an album that redefined the relationship between hip-hop and jazz, they created a vibe built on deep upright bass lines and infectious, high-stakes back-and-forth lyricism. They brought a polished and high-fidelity presence to the golden era, producing a body of work that allowed them to be the first group to truly bridge the gap between the streets and the arts. They proved that curation was their greatest executive skill. They brought a visual iconography to the Hall of Fame that redefined the rap aesthetic. With the stripe-painted woman and the Native Tongues logo, they created a global brand that stood as the ultimate mark of the alternative movement. They showed the industry that success was about daring, releasing hit after hit from Check the Rhyme to Award Tour and Electric Relaxation. They turned the Queen Streets into a platinum canvas, proving that conversational flow was their greatest weapon. They were the first to master the internal group dynamic, showing every artist who followed, from Outkast and The Roots to Kanye West, that a tribe track was the gold standard for artistic integrity. They taught the culture that being abstract meant nothing if your pocket wasn't deep enough to move the crowd. Chapter 3: The We Got It From Here Legacy and the Global Ambassadors of the Abstract. The legacy of A Tribe Called Quest is their total cultural persistence. In 2016, following the passing of the legendary Phife Dawg, they released We Got It From Here. Thank You for Your Service, an album that debuted at #1 and proved that the tribe sound was timeless. They were the first to prove that a group could be the curators of a generation. They navigated the industry transitions by being the universal bridge, collaborating with Busta Rhymes, Common, and Kendrick Lamar simultaneously. They proved that unity was the ultimate power move. They became the elder statesmen of the global East. They successfully transitioned from the VHF era to the digital media era, eventually being recognized as one of the greatest groups in the history of music. They showed every artist who followed, from Lupe Fiasco to Tyler the Creator, that the hip-hop dream was about exploration and authenticity. They transitioned from the Queen's Park to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, proving that the hip-hop producer and poet had the intellect to be respected as masters of a sonic revolution. They showed us that longevity was about evolution and brotherhood. They proved that if the bass is walking and the quest is on, the A Tribe Called Quest era is eternal. Chapter 4: The Induction of the Tribe. We induct A Tribe Called Quest not just for the multi-platinum records or the groundbreaking jazz fusions, but for the dignity they gave the culture. They are the ones who reminded us that hip-hop is a sophisticated art form and that the MC is a global philosopher. They turned the abstract into a national legend and the legend into a legacy. For the rhythms that still pulsate through our speakers, for the doors they kicked open for every alternative voice to follow, and for being the first to show us what a lyrical superpower with soul truly looks like. We officially induct the Architects, the Marauders, the Great A Tribe Called Quest into the Hip Hop Hall of Fame.